Let's be honest, does the economy of a country ever feel like this giant, complicated machine that nobody ever gave you the instruction manual for? Well, in this video, we are going to try and fix that. We'll find out how a nation's economy really works. And we'll start where it all begins, with the money. Let's just ask a simple question. Does a huge country like Canada have a balance sheet, kind of like a massive corporation would? If we think of it as Canada Incorporated, do we, the people, ever get to actually see the books of the country? The answer is, well, it's a bit of a yes and a no, and that's where things start to get really interesting. Okay, if you want to understand a country's finances, you have to start with its budget. But here's the first thing you have to get your head around, and it's a big one. The way a government handles its books is fundamentally completely different from how you and I handle ours. It's completely backwards from how we manage our own money. You and I, we look at our paycheck, what we earn, and then we figure out what we can afford to spend. A government does the exact opposite. They decide what they want to spend on, healthcare, roads, national defense, and then they have to figure out where to get the money to pay for it all. Now, this spend first way of doing things really only leads to three possible outcomes. First, you could have a balanced budget where the money coming in perfectly matches the money going out. That's pretty rare. Then you have a surplus, where the government actually brings in more than it spends. That's very rare. Which leaves us with a third one, the one we see most of the time, a deficit budget, where spending is way higher than revenue. And here's a really crucial point to understand. A deficit isn't just about borrowing to cover the gap like you, or I might use a credit card. A true government deficit means spending more than all the money it gets from taxes, and to balance this out, they usually have to pull three main levers. First, they borrow money by selling government bonds to investors, which keeps things running now but adds to the national debt that has to be paid back with interest later. Second, they can use fiscal policy to either raise taxes, which brings in more cash but can be unpopular, or cut spending on programs, which is like tightening the belt but can slow down services. Finally, they try to grow the economy. If businesses and workers thrive, the government naturally collects more tax money without even having to raise rates, making the deficit easier to manage over time. So that raises a massive question. If the money isn't coming from taxes or from borrowing, or the economy isn't growing, where on earth does it come from? How is that even possible? Well, this brings us to the government's unique superpower. The one trick it has up its sleeve that none of us have when we're a little short on cash. That's right. When a government needs to pay its bills, but the bank account is empty, it can do something truly unique. It can literally create more money. That's the ultimate difference between their budget and ours. This has a technical name, of course. It's called deficit financing. It's the official term for creating new money to pay for things. Now, it might sound like a magic solution to a tricky problem, but this little trick comes with a massive invisible price tag that every single person in the country ends up paying. So what's the catch? I mean, if the government can just create money whenever it wants, why isn't everything free? Well, there is a hidden cost, and it's a cost we all feel every single time we go to the grocery store or fill up the car with gas. That hidden cost is inflation. Deficit financing is what gives birth to it, and understanding this connection is one of the keys to unlocking how the whole economy works. So let's take a look at how this beast is created, and how the government then tries to tame it. Put really simply, inflation is just when prices for everything seem to be going up. It means that the dollar in your pocket today will buy you less stuff than it did yesterday. Your money is literally losing its power. But why does creating more money cause this to happen? This little example here explains it perfectly. Let's walk through it. Picture this. You've got a perfectly stable little economy. 100 cars are built, and people have just enough money to buy exactly 100 cars. Simple. Then the government fires up the printing press and injects a bunch of new money into the system. All of a sudden, people have enough money to buy 110 cars. But here's the problem. There are still only 100 cars to go around. So what happens? Well, with more money chasing the exact same amount of goods, the sellers can just raise the price. That is inflation in a nutshell. And this right here is the critical difference. Look, if the economy is actually growing, meaning we're getting better and making stuff, and there are more goods and services available, then having more money in the system is totally fine. That's healthy growth. The problem, the very definition of inflation, is when the amount of money grows, but the amount of stuff we can actually buy stays the same. Now, this might make it sound like all inflation is bad, but that's not quite right. Think of inflation like blood pressure. You don't want it to be zero. I mean, that's a really bad sign. The same goes for the economy. A little bit of stable inflation, say around 2 or 3%, is actually a sign that things are healthy and growing and encourages people to spend and invest. The danger is when that number gets too high. So when inflation does get too high, what does the government do to fight back? Well, it has two main weapons in its arsenal. The first is fiscal policy, basically raising taxes to suck money out of the economy. You can probably imagine how popular that is, especially with an election coming up. So they usually turn to their second and more common weapon, monetary policy. And that is all about interest rates, falling action, reassuring, calm, methodical. So how does this actually work? Let's look at this chain reaction. It all starts when the Bank of Canada raises interest rates. For you, this means two things. First, saving money becomes way more attractive because you earn more interest in your savings account. Second, borrowing money becomes more expensive. Your mortgage, a car loan, all of it costs more. So what do people do? They naturally start to save a little more and spend a little less. And when that happens across the whole country, less money is circulating, demand for stuff falls, and inflation starts to come back under control. All of these policies, the spending, the money printing, the raising and lowering of interest rates, they don't happen in a vacuum. They are all part of the government's attempt to manage the much larger natural rhythm of the economy, what we call the boom and bust cycle. So a typical cycle often begins right here, in the good times. Companies get more productive, workers get more efficient, and we're making more stuff than ever. The problem is, often, people's wages don't rise quite as fast. So you end up with this weird mismatch. There are more goods for sale than people have the wages to buy. For a while, that gap can be filled with cheap credit and easy loans, creating an artificial sense of demand. But eventually, that debt becomes too much. The bubble bursts, and the economy slumps into a bust or a recession. And this brings us to a really fundamental point about how our economy is managed. These booms and busts, these ups and downs, they are a natural part of a market economy. You can't just eliminate them. So the government's job isn't to prevent the waves. It's to try and be a good surfer and navigate them. And what does that mean in practice? Well, it means using those tools like interest rates to cool things down when the economy gets a little too hot, a little too euphoric. And it means stimulating the economy when things get too slow and severe. The ultimate goal, the whole point of this, is to try and smooth out those peaks and valleys to make the ride less bumpy for all of us. So after all that, we land right back here today. Understanding how budgets, deficits, inflation, and interest rates all work together gives you the toolkit to analyze the world around you. The goal is always a smooth ride. Which leads me to the final question for you. Looking at everything we have just discussed, how bumpy do you think the ride is right now?